Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I leave the library and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It's a lovely day here in suburban Chicago. And by lovely, I mean it's warm enough that I don't need my jacket, but it is also on the verge of raining. So I guess I'll leave you to decide what counts as lovely. Nonetheless, I thought I would talk to you a little bit about some games I've been playing recently. That's right, it's time for another Board Game Espresso Triple Shot. Got that latte all prepared? Okay, let's go to it. For those of you new to the podcast, Board Game Espresso Triple Shot is a short review episode in which I talk about 3 games I've tried recently for the first time. I give a quick first impression of them, and then usually I talk about 1 game I've dusted off or otherwise played that's not a brand new game. These are, on the par of 3 to 5 minutes, so they are very quick first impression. They should not be taken as a review, and I try to caution about that, but you never know. So, today's first game that I'm going to talk about is Titanic. This game was published in 2020 and has the cover to match the 1997 James Cameron film of the same name. It's got Jack and Rose looking at each other all lovey-dovey, and this game is from Adrian Adamescu and Daryl Andrews and published by Spin Master Limited. If those names sound familiar, Adamescu and Andrews are the designers of Sagrada, which is a better game, just a little. I'm just kidding, just a lot. So Titanic is a game that I own because I am really interested in the Titanic, so I own a bunch of games about the Titanic. This one in particular is interesting and amusing and kind of silly. It definitely falls into my novelty game category. That said, it is the best of the Titanic novelty games that I've played. In this game, you play either Rose or Jack or Captain Smith or Cal or Rose's mom. I can't remember her name, but those are the 5 characters that you can play. The game does not have an inherent positive or negative. You're not like on teams. You can win as Cal and it's not seen as being horrible. That said, each character does have a special ability that you can use once and you can reset by going up to the top of the ship. The mechanisms in Titanic are actually pretty interesting for a game that's clearly a mass market game meant for folks who aren't really deep into the hobby. In Titanic, you are running around and your goal is to get passengers from the ship over to the lifeboat and then launch them into the ocean. Different passengers will give you different amounts of points, and there are a limited number of lifeboats, and so there's a limited number of passengers who can be saved. There's also a timer in the game as you're playing where you're really revealing these flood cards and the ship is flooding from the bottom to the top. You can get these items as well. The main choices you're making as you're playing are kind of deciding which way you want to run, and the conflict comes with the other players as there are limited spots on the lifeboats, and so you can't get points unless you put people on lifeboats, and other people are competing to put people on those lifeboats. So it's a pretty simple game. I won't exaggerate its qualities. It is a bit more complex than most mass market games, but I think well within the possibility of people playing who don't play the kinds of games I talk about on here. The product design the art is fine. The pieces are all pretty crappy. For instance, there are these rings that in most games would be a nice thick piece of cardstock, and in this game they're like a thin piece of like plastic cardstock, kind of plasticized stock, very thin. There's a bunch of stuff like that because this is meant to be a mass market game. I think I got it for $10 on sale at Amazon. I think the full price of it at the store was probably $20. I can't imagine that it was more than that. So it's a pretty cheap product. That said, we had an amusing time playing it. It is a very standard mass market game, so from a novelty perspective, it is what it is. But I enjoyed it. If you get a chance to play, if you're a Titanic enthusiast and you get a chance to play a Titanic game, you should probably play either Deck Chairs on the Titanic or SOS Titanic. But there's worse games to play than Titanic from 2020. The second game I want to talk about today is from Indie Boards and Cards, designer Jenny Iglesias, Nick Little, and Kevin Riley, and this is Aeon's End. Aeon's End is a cooperative game in which you play wizards fighting magical monsters that are attacking your town. The gimmick of the game is that you have to defend the town, and so if you let a certain amount of damage get through, then the town is destroyed and you lose. You can lose a player without losing the game, which is a nice twist. The big thing that makes Aeon's End interesting, it's a deck building game, and you never shuffle your deck. The order you discard your cards in is the order you're going to draw them in, because when you're done with playing your hand, you're just going to flip it over. When your deck runs out, you're going to take your discard pile and just flip it over and start drawing from what was the bottom. This makes for a really interesting game because you have to sort of plan as you're discarding cards where you're going to put them. The game is also very specific about when things get discarded because you have to do it in the right order. We played a couple rounds of this. I think we played 3 games altogether. We got this as a family game to play, mostly with my mother-in-law, who really enjoys this kind of game, and we've run out of games to play of Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle. We finished that game. We completed all of the different missions, and while that game was really fun, I don't think we want to keep playing it on missions we've already played. So I was looking for something that had a similar feel, that was challenging, that we wouldn't win every time, that was interesting, that had a lot of variety and potential for a lot of expansion. And it turns out Aeon's End is just the trick. Aeon's End is interesting, it's fun to play, it's reasonably challenging. Each enemy is difficult in a different way. The hero characters play very similarly, but each has their own thing that they do. There's a variety of different cards that you can put in the market, so you can change it up that way. And they've released a ton of expansion content for it. So after we've played our way through the base villains and tried out the different heroes, I can always order another expansion for $15 or $20 and we'll have some new material to play through. So it looks like Aeon's End is going to be a great fit for that role in our family gaming. And yeah, it turns out there's a reason it's rated 7.9. It's pretty dang good. We had a lot of fun with it. The way the game works, I really like this mechanism too. You have these spell slots, and each player can cast spells into the spell slots, which then kind of grow for a turn. And then on your next turn, you get to actually resolve those spells. So the game has some options of like, the enemies might hurt the person who has the most spells waiting to cast, or it might get rid of your best spell, or that sort of thing. So there's some really interesting mechanisms there. You also can put energy toward opening more spell slots, but of course, anytime you're doing that, you're not actually casting spells. There's a lot of really interesting stuff where you help each other. And then the turn order mechanism is neat. There's a deck of cards that have each of the 4 characters that are playing, and it has 2 cards for the enemies, and you shuffle up these 6 cards, and then you go through all 6. So you could go right away at the beginning of the round, or you could not go to the end of the round. The enemy might go twice in a row. The enemy might go right at the beginning, and then you have like 4 turns to set up before they're going to go again. It's a really interesting mechanism. It can make for some long downtime though. In a 4-player game, we did have a couple times where somebody was at the beginning of one round of play and at the end of the next round of play. So they actually had like, 5-10 turns in between their turns, which isn't great, but overall pretty fun. So if you get a chance to play Aeon's End, I highly recommend it. Really good time. We'll be playing it a lot, and I'm sure I'll mention the expansions as we go. I do always like to talk about a dusty game, and I did dust off a game recently that is just, it's a little morsel of a game. There's not a lot to it, but it's a good time every now and again. And this is Dude, and its sequel, More Dude. The basic premise of the game is pretty simple. You have a card that says Dude on it. You have to say Dude in a way that you think evokes the way that the word Dude is written on the card. And then other people will also be saying Dude, and you try to figure out if you and another person are saying Dude the same way. And if you are, you get a point. If you're not, you lose those cards. We go until someone has gone through all their cards. It's pretty dumb, but it's a really nice 5 minutes or 10 minutes if you play the sequel More Dude. So that's usually, I suggest playing 2 rounds, Dude and More Dude. And it makes for a very entertaining play as people interpret how the cards are written and try to figure out who's matching them. There's not, like I said, there's not a lot to it. I've explained the entire game to you, and frankly, most of the inherent depth at work in the game also. So it is not something that you should write home about. But I thought of it the other day because I saw somebody was talking about showing their thrift store purchases, and they showed that Dude was on the shelf and they passed it up. And I was like, oh, you missed out not picking up Dude. It's a goofy, fun game that you should have checked out. They're like, it looked pretty stupid. I'm like, I didn't say it wasn't stupid. I just said it's a fun game that you should have checked out. So that is Dude, designed by Bo Beckett and Jeff Stahal, and published by North Star Game Studio. Finally, the last game I want to talk about is a game from Z-Man Games from 2015, so it's a little older. It's called Bastion. Bastion is a tower defense game in which you have a castle in the middle of the board and you have a variety of enemies that are marching around the side trying to attack the castle. It is as a tower defense game, it feels very similar to sort of slightly more grown-up Castle Panic. I will say I thought it was pretty interesting. There was a fair amount of conversation back and forth. My son said he likes Castle Panic better. I can see that. I can see why you might. I thought Bastion was pretty interesting as well. The mechanisms are slightly different. There are these crystals that you're managing, which I thought made for an interesting play. I think, at least after our first play, I didn't say I should sell Bastion, but I don't think it'll stay in our collection very long. I think 1 or 2 more plays, and that'll probably be enough of that game for me. And so it will move right along. On the other hand, there is a game sale at Toggle next week, and I want to bring a few games to sell, so maybe Bastion will go into that pile. We'll see. But Bastion is from 2015, designed by Evgeny Nikitin and Nikolay Pegasov, published by Z-Man Games. So that brings me to the end of my episode and my end of my chat with you. It does make me curious, what games have you been playing lately? Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and you can share the games that you've been playing, your recent quick plays, and I'd love to hear what those are so I can compare and say, yeah, that looks good, or no, that doesn't look good, or whatever. You could also email me, Brendan at Rattlebox Games, or send a geek mail message to Wombat929, which is my Board Game Geek username. I'd love to hear from you there. Beyond that, I hope that you have a lovely day. And the ducks are still hanging out at my bird feeder. So if you listened yesterday or last time I left, the ducks were there. Now I'm returning home. The ducks are still there, having a good time, eating some bird seed. So, haha. Well, I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye. Speaking of expansions, instead of a Dusty game today, I'm going to talk about an expansion. We downloaded the... Oh, I'm sorry. Never mind.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.